Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Now let me take you there. At my father's funeral, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. The kind of silence that presses down on your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. We stood inside a grand cathedral in Chicago, surrounded by the most powerful figures in the logistics industry. But my sister-in-law, Samantha, hadn't come to grieve. She had come to seize power. Before the priest could complete the final blessing, she grabbed the microphone. Her voice sliced through the mournful stillness like a blade. With absolute confidence, she declared that my brother, Zachary, was now the official CEO of our $600 million company. She smiled brightly, scanning the crowd, waiting for applause. That was the moment everything changed. A sound suddenly boomed through the cathedral's high-end speaker system. A sharp, unmistakable laugh. Dry, deliberate. And it came from the direction of my father's coffin. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a ghost. It was a recording. But the fear that washed over Zachary's face, that was real. Before I go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing who's part of this community. To understand why my father was laughing from beyond the grave, you need to rewind about 10 minutes. Zachary and Samantha were treating the funeral like a red carpet event. This wasn't a farewell to them. It was a networking opportunity. From my seat in the front pew, I watched Zachary shake hands with board members, graciously accepting condolences for a role he hadn't officially earned yet. Samantha leaned close to him, gesturing toward the cathedral's stained glass windows and whispering about how similar designs would look in the executive suite. They barely acknowledged me. I may as well have been furniture. Zachary leaned over, straightening a tie worth more than my monthly rent, and muttered, "Relax, Jessica. We'll find a place for you downstairs. Someone has to manage the paperwork while the grown-ups run things." He smiled as he said it. To him, I wasn't a leader, I was a glorified assistant. He believed he was invincible simply because he was the eldest son. He thought his last name gave him unlimited credit. I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I didn't ask for respect. Instead, a strange, icy calm settled over me. Across the aisle sat Peter, my father's chief of staff. He'd been the backbone of this company for 4 decades. In his hand was a small remote control. I met his eyes and gave him one subtle nod. That was all he needed. Peter stood, walked quietly to the rear of the cathedral, and locked the massive oak doors. The sound of the bolt clicking into place echoed loudly in the hush. Then he raised the remote and aimed it at the enormous projector screen behind the altar, the one set up for the memorial video. He pressed play. The screen lit up, but it wasn't filled with warm family photos or nostalgic memories. Instead, my father, Adam, appeared seated behind his desk, staring straight into the camera. He didn't look gentle. He didn't look sentimental. He looked like a man about to fire someone. And then that laugh played again, thundering through the cathedral. Zachary and Samantha froze. Their early victory lap was over. The reckoning had begun. As the room fell silent and everyone stared at my father's pixelated face settling into a stern glare, my thoughts drifted far from that cathedral, back to where this empire was actually built. Not inside glossy boardrooms or over champagne lunches, but in frozen rail yards at 3 a.m. While Zachary was busy making appearances in Ibiza or schmoozing at Formula One events, I was standing ankle-deep in icy sludge at a distribution hub outside Detroit, negotiating with union reps to keep shipments moving. For a decade, I was the unseen force behind everything, the one fixing problems before anyone even realized something was broken. I missed my best friend's wedding because life-saving medical supplies were trapped in customs in Rotterdam. I spent my 25th birthday locked inside a server room, rebooting our tracking systems after a cyber attack. I didn't do it because I loved pressure. I did it because I believed in a promise that turned out to be false. I convinced myself that skill was its own currency, that if I worked harder, if I became essential enough, merit would eventually outweigh bloodlines. I learned to stay quiet. In this industry, a woman who speaks up is labeled emotional, but a woman who fixes problems silently is considered valuable. So I became invaluable. I audited fuel expenditures. I redesigned shipping routes. I eliminated $12 million in operational waste in a single fiscal year. I told myself this was dignity. I told myself I was honoring the family name. What I was really doing was building my own chains, links forged from responsibility and obligation. I thought staying invisible proved my loyalty. I thought my father noticed. I believed he understood that while Zachary was the face of the company, I was the engine keeping it alive. But sitting there, watching Samantha nervously clutch her jewelry, I finally understood the truth. My silence hadn't been strategic. It had been permission. By not demanding recognition, I allowed them to erase me. I let them treat my work like a natural resource, something to extract endlessly without acknowledgement. I wasn't a partner. I was infrastructure. You don't thank a foundation for holding up a house. You just expect it to be there. And that expectation was their fatal error. They mistook my quiet for weakness. They thought I stayed silent because I couldn't fight back. They didn't realize I was quiet because I was keeping records. Every skipped holiday, every stolen idea, every time Zachary took credit for deals I closed, everything was logged. I wasn't just working. I was building equity in an account they couldn't see. And as I watched my father on that screen, I knew something else. He had been keeping score too. He saw Zachary drain the company like a personal expense account, and he saw me protect it like something alive, something worth defending. Those invisible chains were about to shatter, and when they did, the sound would be impossible to ignore. If you're wondering why I didn't feel even a hint of guilt watching my brother unravel in that church, you need to know what happened 3 days earlier. Our father had been gone for less than 4 hours. The coroner had just left the house. And instead of going to the funeral home, Zachary and Samantha went straight to corporate headquarters. I was already seated in my father's office with Peter, trying to steady the stock price and calm our international partners, assuring them the company wasn't about to implode. We were mourning, but we were still working, because that's what this role requires. Then the elevator doors slid open and the chaos walked in. Zachary entered like a man who believed he'd just claimed a throne. He wasn't dressed in black. Instead, he wore a sharp navy suit that screamed freshly acquired wealth. He didn't ask about funeral plans. He didn't check on the staff. He marched straight to the massive oak desk my father had crafted with his own hands and dragged a finger along its surface. "This has to go," he said. "Too old-fashioned. I want glass. I want chrome. I want something that looks visionary." Samantha followed close behind, tapping rapidly on her phone. She wasn't calling family. She was contacting an interior designer. "We need to rip out this entire floor," she declared, her voice bouncing through the heavy silence. "It smells like aging men in diesel. We'll need a private lounge, a wet bar, maybe even a helipad on the roof. Zachary needs a proper arrival." Peter stood up. His face was pale with grief, but he tried to ground the room. He told them we were managing a liquidity emergency. He reminded them that the drivers were anxious about their pensions. Zachary laughed, actually laughed. He looked at Peter, the man who once taught him how to tie his shoes, and said, "Relax, Peter. You won't be around much longer anyway. We need new blood. You're outdated. Think of this as your notice." Then he turned toward me. I was holding a bundle of urgent shipping manifests. Zachary yanked them from my hands and tossed them onto the floor. "And you, Jessica," he sneered. "We need a real public face for this company. Someone with presence. You can stay on to handle paperwork and coffee runs. You're good at the dull stuff. Basically a glorified secretary, right? Just keep things running while I enjoy the profits." For the next hour, they talked about selling off the trucking fleet to fund a villa in Tuscany, because, according to them, remote work was the future. They discussed tearing apart a 50-year legacy to bankroll a lifelong vacation. They were rulers on paper. They believed the title itself gave them authority. They didn't understand that real power comes from the respect of the people you lead. And in 60 minutes, they lost all of it. I didn't challenge them. I bent down, gathered the papers from the floor, and stacked them neatly. I looked at Peter and saw something ignite behind his eyes. That was when the plan took shape. They wanted the title. Fine, they could have it. But they were about to discover that the crown they were stealing was made of lead, and it was going to pull them straight to the ocean floor. The screen didn't fade into nostalgic footage of fishing trips or birthday celebrations. There was no gentle goodbye. Instead, my father appeared, leaning back in his leather chair, arms crossed, as the camera zoomed in on his eyes, cold, unyielding, the eyes of a man who had faced down union strikes and supply chain disasters for 4 decades. He cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the room like a gavel striking wood. "Zachary," my father's recorded voice thundered, "you've spent the last 10 years waiting for this moment. Waiting for me to die, so you could stop asking permission and start spending the principal. You mistook my generosity for approval. You thought every check I wrote for one of your brilliant ideas was an endorsement." The image shifted. My father's video shrank to the corner as a massive, high-resolution Excel spreadsheet filled the screen. Rows glowed in red. It was a ledger, a record of failure. "Let's review the portfolio," my father continued, his tone flat and methodical. Item 1, the Miami nightclub. You called it a cultural investment. Cost, $2.4 million. Status, bankrupt within 6 months. Item 2, the vintage car restoration venture. Cost, $1.8 million. Status, liquidated for scrap. Item 3, your personal branding consultants. Cost, $400,000 annually. The room was utterly silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming. Samantha stopped gesturing at imaginary renovations. She stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, watching the figures roll past. It was a public dissection of their entire way of life. "People told me I was spoiling you," my father went on. "They said I was destroying you by giving you everything you wanted. But they were wrong. I wasn't spoiling you, son. I was testing you. I was conducting a feasibility study on your character. I gave you unlimited resources to see whether you'd build something meaningful or simply burn it all down. I wanted to know if the golden child could turn lead into gold, or if he'd just paint everything yellow and call it success." This was the golden child's curse exposed in crystal clarity. My father hadn't been blind to Zachary's incompetence. He had been cataloging it. He let Zachary consume his own future because it was the only way to prove, objectively, that he was unfit to lead. He gave him the rope, and Zachary tied the noose himself. "You failed," my father said as the spreadsheet vanished and his face filled the screen once more. "You destroyed everything. But here's what you overlooked. I'm a businessman. I don't hand out capital without contracts." He paused. "Do you remember those standard agreements Peter had you sign? Every time I wired you money, you never read them. You were too busy celebrating. But if you had bothered, you'd know something crucial." My father smiled then, a cold, unsettling expression. "Those weren't gifts, Zachary. They were loans. Loans taken against your inheritance. By my calculations, every last dollar was already gone." The spreadsheet disappeared from the screen, replaced by a scanned copy of a legal document. Bright white, clean, undeniably official. At the bottom, signed in bold blue ink, was a large, overconfident signature, Zachary Vance. My brother leaned forward in the pew, narrowing his eyes. I saw the exact second recognition hit him. His mouth fell open. His fingers began to tremble. 5 years earlier, my father's recorded voice continued evenly. "You needed bail money after that incident in Monaco. You needed it immediately, and you needed discretion. You signed this promissory note along with an equity transfer agreement. You didn't bother reading it. The print was small, and you were too hungover. So, let me remind you of the most important section." The text on the screen zoomed in, highlighting paragraph 4. "If the borrower's total outstanding debt to the company exceeds $6 million, the borrower agrees to permanently surrender all equity voting rights and any inheritance claims within the company. Furthermore, all associated equity will immediately transfer to any individual who clears the debt on behalf of the company." The cathedral went completely still. The silence was so deep it felt heavy. My father paused the video, letting the meaning settle into the room. "Last month," he resumed, "your debt reached $6,200,000. Technically, the company could have taken everything from you. Your condo, your vehicles, your lifestyle. But someone intervened. Someone paid it off. Someone used their personal bonuses, their savings, and years of unpaid effort to erase your failures so the company wouldn't collapse. The screen changed one final time, displaying a bank transfer confirmation. Amount: $6,200,000. Sender: Jessica Vance. You didn't inherit this company, my father said, his voice lowering into something almost intimate. You sold it, piece by piece, drink by drink, error by error, and your sister bought it back. She didn't receive this empire. She purchased it at full value. She owns your shares. She owns your vote. She owns the chair you're sitting in right now. I watched Samantha turn toward Zachary. The expression on her face wasn't affection. It wasn't worry. It was the look of someone realizing the investment she made was already worthless, like discovering the racehorse she bet on had been turned into glue. She began screaming at him right there in the church, but her voice was swallowed by my father's closing words. Jessica, he said, looking into the camera with a softness I hadn't heard in years, the keys are in the safe. Terminate him. The screen went black. The projector's hum faded away, leaving a silence so absolute it felt like the oxygen had been pulled from the room. The lights slowly rose, revealing the ruins of my brother's pride. Samantha moved first. She turned toward Zachary, and whatever admiration or ambition had once burned in her eyes vanished instantly. In its place was raw, unmistakable disgust. In that moment, she understood the truth. Her supposed golden ticket was actually a liability. She hadn't married a CEO. She had married a man with $6 million in debt and nothing to his name. She didn't comfort him. She didn't touch him. She shoved him. You lied to me, she snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet. You said it was finished. You said the money was yours. Zachary didn't even look at her. He scrambled out of the pew and rushed toward me, his face drained of color, sweat shining on his skin. When he met my eyes, the arrogance I'd known my entire life was gone. What replaced it was pure fear. He reached for my hand. I stepped back. Jessica, he stuttered, shaking. This is a joke, right? Dad wasn't well. He didn't know what he was saying. You can't do this. We're family. You don't fire family. I looked at him, really looked at him, and something finally clicked. For years, he and Samantha had intimidated me. They walked like they owned every room. They spoke as if the world bent around them. But now, stripped of inheritance and illusion, he looked small, fragile, like a child playing dress-up in a suit he couldn't afford. That's when I realized their power had never been real. It was borrowed. Their confidence, their identity, their authority. It was all a subscription funded by my father's wallet. And that subscription had just expired. Without the money propping them up, there was nothing underneath. Just empty bravado pretending to be dominance. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scold him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of emotion. I simply held it out. This isn't a joke, Zachary, I said calmly. This is your termination notice, effective immediately. Peter has already deactivated your access cards and locked you out of all company accounts. He stared at the envelope like it might explode. And inside, I continued, is a repayment plan for the remaining $200,000 you still owe the estate. First payment is due on the 1st of the month. Don't miss it. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He just stood there, royalty without a realm, while the board members behind us glanced at their watches, ready to move on with real work. Leaving the cathedral felt nothing like entering it. The air felt lighter, the sunlight sharper. Peter was waiting by the car, the rear door already open. For 2 decades, he had opened that door for my father. That day, he opened it for me. He said nothing, but the faint smile on his face said everything. We both understood. The chaos had ended. Order had returned. On the drive back to the office, we passed the main distribution warehouse. I looked at the massive signage, the trucks lining up at the docks, the sheer scope of it all. For 10 years, I had looked at this place and felt crushed by responsibility. That day, I felt something different. Ownership. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was mine. I had paid for it with sleepless nights and missed holidays, and I had the proof to show for it. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A notification. Samantha had filed for divorce. I dismissed it. Then another call from Zachary. I blocked the number. I didn't feel bad. I felt efficient, like removing dead weight from a system that needed to function. That night, I slept peacefully. I didn't lie awake worrying about what Zachary might ruin next. I rested, knowing the empire was finally protected, held by the only person who had ever truly earned it. If you believe leadership is something you earn, not something you're handed, hit like and share this story. And tell me, would you have forgiven the debt? Or did Zachary get exactly what he deserved?